I think the hour is here.
You've been doing the background.
Still did a great job.
Has anybody ever commented that a girl from Delta married a carbonate geologist? I mean, that's,
Seriously,
Yeah,
I think
that's
it fits. All the while I was growing up, there's always geologists.
Couldn't we
in-
ask how did a girl marry a carbonated geologist?
Always geologists in the pub at Flat.
And her,
Yeah.
her family disowned her, but she didn't care. All right, let's go. So we're going to continue today with Mary Anning. I was thinking we'd get through this pretty quickly and move on to Darwin, but we're not going to. This will take most of the rest of the day. And so we'll move on to Darwin next time, or else, unless
Either
you,
way.
or we might do a little bit of dinosaur stuff next time. Do you want to do that? Okay, next time we'll talk about Gideon Mantell and Buckland and some of the early dinosaur discoveries.
Gross
and
humans.
things. Yeah. Okay. So somebody just commented, for those of you who aren't on site here, somebody commented that looking at some of this stuff, it looks like we have way too little time and way too much to see, and that's true, and you'll sort of get a flavor of that out of what we're talking about today, because the main person we're talking about is Mary Anning, who lived in Lyme Regis from 1799 to her death, and premature death in 1847, lived all of her life there. I think she went to London once. But there was an orbit of very influential geologists and scientists that came to her and used her specimens to make their names and fortunes. Well, not their fortunes, if they weren't already wealthy, they wouldn't have had time to do any of this stuff. They would have been working. So anyway, a few of them: William Buckland, William Conybeare, Henry de la Beche, Gideon Mantell, Sir Richard Owen, Sir Roderick Murchison. In fact, all of them, I think, but Gideon Mantell were Sir by the end of things.
Gideon was a doctor.
So you'll remember from last time that Mary Anning's father came from just up the road from Lyme Regis. This is the boundary between Devonshire and Dorset. So he grew up in Colyton, married in Blandford Forum. They moved back to Colyton for a short period of time, and then the Annings, Richard and Molly, moved to Lyme Regis, and that's where they had their 10 children, two of whom survived to adulthood. So they buried 8 of their children, which was unfortunately not an uncommon thing back then. William Buckland was born in Axminster, so a lot of the characters were pretty close to that area. Anyway, so on to Lyme Regis. And this is a sketch that I think I showed last time that comes from Henry de la Beche in 1822, doing a geological cross-section from west to east in a distance of about 9 miles. Lyme Regis is right here. This is a hill called the Black Ven that we'll talk about here in a minute. About a mile to the east is Charmouth, which is a lovely little village. A lot of good geology there, but you can see the stratigraphy, predominantly Jurassic in age. This area that's halfway between Charmouth and Lyme Regis is called the Black Ven. And you'll recall that Richard Anning was a cabinet maker, but he was a dissenter, was of lower class, so they really struggled. They really had nothing. It was a very subsistence existence for them. So once wealthy people started traveling to Lyme Regis, two interests of his converged. That is fossil collecting and selling fossils to make a living for his family. So for many years, he would be out combing the sea cliffs after storms, finding really nice fossils that he could sell to the landed gentry and the royals who came to visit. He would take his daughter Mary and his son Joseph with him, much to Molly's consternation. She didn't want to lose any more children, and it was a dangerous proposition because of the sea cliffs were unstable, the tides would come in, big storms would come in. Those were the best times to be out fossilizing. One day he was on his way to Charmouth across the Black Ven, fell off this cliff and was unconscious, was discovered, and this was in 1807, and he never really fully recovered. And in 1810, he died of consumption whatever that was, but he never recovered his vigor after his accident there. So Molly Anning is pregnant. She has a 13-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter to try and take care of. Richard Anning left them 120 pounds in debt, and debt wasn't forgiven at death. She was expected to pay all that back. So Molly found herself in some pretty dire straits. Just before we get back into the story, here's some of the stratigraphy. I love this, my favorite one, shales with beef. Right? So
It's like the garden.
beef, these are nodules that have a cone-in-cone kind of serrated structure to them. So these were shales with concretions. The black vein marl from down the way, the belemnite marl member, the green ammonite member, the galt and the green sand. Underneath the shales with beef, you can see at the very top shales with beef, and right next to it the saurian shales, or the lizard shales, the fish ledge shales. And if we come on down a little bit farther, well, you can see all the weird names, but the speckety, the iron ledge, speckety shales, second mongrel, the top copper, second tape, rattle. So anyway, every one of these beds has been named by
Are they really
specific.
continuous enough to warrant having their own member name, or? That's crazy.
If you're looking for fossils, I guess so. Anyway, maybe a little. But each of these couplets represents a depositional cycle, sea level change. Anyway, so after Dad dies, and there's a period of mourning, they're really sort of at the end of their tether, really not sure what to do. They're in debt. Molly's sort of moping around because of the loss of her husband and just the burden she's feeling. Well, then Mary and Joseph, maybe just to feel close to their dad, just to get away from the melancholy of their mom, head back out at the ages of 11 and 14, start looking for fossils again. And so Mary Annie, here she is, well, obviously this is
Actual picture.
an imposter. I mean, this is a huge market down in that. They have a fossil days and all that, and there's a woman who dresses up like Mary Anning and makes a living by taking people out to the fossil collecting and so on. Here's a picture of this woman. So Mary Anning starts to look for fossils again, and one day she's out and finds a really nice ammonite. And unbeknownst to her, there's a woman that's been watching her, and when she sees the specimen that she gets, she offers her half of a crown for it. So let's go through this just a little bit. So the smallest unit of money was the penny. And plural of that is pence. There were 12 pence to a shilling, 20 shillings to a pound. So 240 pence to a pound, right? Okay. A crown is 5 shillings. Okay. And a half a crown is 30 pence, or an eighth of a pound, or about $15 in today's parlance. So here she is. This would be about the wages she would have made working 50 hours a week at or typical wages cleaning homes and things. So here she has, a pretty good sum of money she takes home to Molly, and her mother perks up, and she's a little concerned about the safety, but doesn't keep Joseph and Mary from heading out fossilizing after that. So that's her first experience making money. Here are just a few of the events that take place in her life and some of the important scientific discoveries that she makes. We'll go through and take a look at most of these. So in 1810, so the end of the year where the dad had just died, young Joseph, now 13 years old, or 15 at the time, was out looking along the sea cliffs, and he came across what we talked about last time, this 4-foot-long head, jaws, and part of the neck of the first ichthyosaur. he wasn't able to continue. He had to go to work at minimum wage to help with the family, and he asked Mary if she'd go out and keep looking for this thing. So there had been a landslip, a fall, and he had found the head weathering out. She went back to that same place, and over the next several weeks, finally dug out, she found the rest of it. She got help from some of the locals to come out and help bring pieces back and help dig before the sea came in and claimed it all. And so that was the first ichthyosaur dug from the shales just east of town between 1810 and 1811. And for that, they were paid 23 pounds. So here it is. Here's the specimen that Joseph had found, and then Mary found the rest of it. And I think I mentioned this last time, 2011 was the 200th anniversary of its discovery. So it came back, here it is coming back to Lime Regis for a celebration. But back in the day, the specimen was purchased by Henry H. Henley of Caldway Manor, who owned a lot of property around Lime Regis. And he paid 23 pounds for it, which would be about $2,800 in today. So that's a sizable sum of money, right? Okay. Remember, they were 125 pounds in debt. The specimen was taken by and sent to London to be displayed in a thing called Bullock's Museum. They had a lot of artifacts and things from Captain Cook's trips around the world. They displayed it there. They didn't mention Joseph or Mary Anning. 5 years later, it was sold to the British Museum for twice what she was paid, which is a pretty good markup over it, pretty good investment after 5 years. So finally, it was named by the curator of the British Museum, a fellow named Charles Koenig. It was finally named Ichthyosaur, meaning fish lizard, because he really didn't know what it was. Okay, so that's where the name came from. Now, in 1812, the same year where Mary found the remainder of the ichthyosaur, during that year there shows up in town a 16-year-old boy by the name of Henry de la Beche. And Henry de la Beche ends up being the first director of the Geological Survey of Britain, and goes on to become Sir Henry de la Beche during his lifetime. And the reason he was there is because his mother had just married for the third time to a local shop or a local merchant by the name of William Aveline in Lyme. And he had just sort of flunked out of a prestigious military school for insubordination. So he went along with her. And the local newspaper, the Lymead, called her Madame Trois Maris, meaning Madame Three Husbands, as a derogatory thing. I mean, just these papers were, this class stuff was vicious. Okay?
Like French exile from Revolutionary Wars, or what?
De la Beche?
Yeah.
Somewhere had French ancestry. It just means beach now, right? So there's the picture of Henry as Sir Henry with his rock hammer. This is the picture in the National Portrait Gallery. This is his geological map that he made of southern Pembrokeshire. So he also was working on a geological map of the country, or the survey was, in addition to the Geological Society of London and also William Smith, right? So he became a very close friend to Mary Anning, who was 4 years his junior. And some people wonder about whether they were kind of boyfriend-girlfriend, or maybe that she speculated that the only way to really get out of poverty would be to marry well, and maybe he was wealthy because his father, Thomas de la Beche, owned a plantation in Jamaica that made a lot of money. And his father had died, and so he inherited a lot of this money. So he was well enough off that, go to military school, geologize, do those other things. So anyway, they became fast friends and went out and did a lot of collecting together. And he, as we'll see, he helped her out quite a bit. Here he is in 1853. This is 4 years after Mary dies of, or 6 years after Mary dies of breast cancer in 1847. He was quite an artist. We'll come back to Henry de la Beche when we talk about the Great Devonian Controversy, because Murchison and Sedgwick were pulling for this new Devonian system, and he was suggesting, through correlations or miscorrelations, a different model for the rocks of Devonshire that had coal and other things. But he was quite an artist, and I don't know if you remember, but Charles Lyell had the view that there really are no extinct organisms, that we should find everything eventually in the fossil record, and that things were cyclical and things that had disappeared could come back eventually. So he really didn't have a directional sort of evolutionary view that we now do of fossils and life. So Henry de la Beche drew this as sort of a mockery of that, and this suggests that sometime in the future maybe humans would disappear, and ichthyosaurs, when they showed back up, might find human skulls like we find their skulls and give lectures. You will at once perceive, continued Professor Ichthyosaur, that the skull before us belonged to some of the lower order of animals. The teeth are very insignificant, the power of the jaws trifling, and altogether seems wonderful how this creature could have procured food. So here's Professor Ichthyosaur. So he's kind of a character. Sort of eventually, after in 1818 he got married, probably to the chagrin of the Anning family, to someone else. They went on a year-long honeymoon to Europe,
Doesn't
to the
everybody?
continent. Yeah. So, but when he got back in 1820, he co-authored a monograph on ichthyosaurs with Connie Bear. So. This is sort of an interesting image. It was taken by famous photographer William Henry Fox Talbot. It's a salt print, meaning they use, I can't remember the salt of, I can't remember which one it was, but anyway, it was a way of developing early photographs. And the title of it is The Geologists, and it's along the coast not far to the west in Chudleigh, Devon, about 1843, and people speculate that that might be Henry de la Beche, and that might be actually Mary Anning. So, by the way, the locals would have called her Mary Hanning. Even though there wasn't an H on the front, the pronunciation would have been Hanning. So in addition to Henry de la Beche coming there and becoming a partner in crime with her and finding good specimens, in 1815, a few years later, along comes the first professor of geology at Oxford, William Buckland. And he was 16 years her senior, but he went and asked Mom if it'd be okay if he went out fossilizing with Joseph and Mary, and permission was given. And so he came back several times, and they went out and found a number of specimens together over that time. But he became a benefactor of hers to a degree, although he had a conduit through him, specimens to William Conybeare. Conybeare was an early geologist and a reverend near Cardiff, but had a real keen interest in geology. He's the one that taught Buckland and who else? One of the early geologists taught them Sedgwick taught them about geology, and Conybeare was an influence on them. So he went on to become the first professor of geology at Oxford. And he is I think mentioned last time, he's sort of a weird guy. And he would have been a very entertaining lecturer. He had a bear that he kept, and he'd bring that sometimes to class. You go into his offices, there'd be snakes and guinea pigs and other things roaming around.
Not in cages.
And I think I also mentioned that he ate his way through the alphabet from aardvark to, he said the worst things to eat the only thing worse than a mole were the blue bottle flies that he would eat. So he was just sort of, so this is zoophagy, I guess is what it's called, but anyway, he's sort of a interesting guy.
He'd do his field work in like coattails, right?
He would do his field work with his robes on.
Yeah.
But his horse, it was about 100 miles from Oxford to Lyme. And he had a horse that he'd go out on, and the horse got to the point that if there was a rock outcropping, it stopped. And it wouldn't go until he got off and got back on. Okay, so.
Because he did, the horse just knew.
So here we see a couple ichthyosaurs, Ichthyosaurus communis, Ichthyosaurus intermedius, and they were figured by William Buckland in a paper in 1837. In that same year in 1815, there was a sailing ship called the Alexander, and it's on its way from Bombay, India to London, and it almost made it. Then a big gale kicked up on Easter, and the ship foundered and it sank. And the next morning when Marianne went out looking for fossils, she discovered there laid out on the beach the body of this young woman named Lady Jackson. And the body was taken to St. Michael's Church and laid out until somebody came to claim her. I guess every day Mary would go up and just sort of, look at her. And anyway, she's the one who discovered her on the beach. So.
Black lady, the only body she found over the years.
No, probably not. Probably not. So here's Reverend William Conybeare, and he became very interested, among other things, in fossil reptiles, and he's the one who published the first account. So he called it Eurypterogeus intermedius and communis, and the name was later changed, or these names have been changed, I guess, from Ichthyosaurus. The parentheses there mean Conybeare named it, but the genus name has changed, but the species is the same. So here are two varieties, and he became very famous for his study of ichthyosaurs. How much credit do you think he gave to Mary Anning? 0. So his reputation was made on the back of her work. Not to be outdone, Sir Richard Owen, who coined the term dinosaur, you can see here's Ichthyosaurus breviceps. Owen, meaning he named this specimen from, or this particular species. I think there were 4 altogether by the time end of Mary Anning's life. So in 1818, a few years later, a complete ichthyosaur was found and shipped off to someone wealthy to examine it.
Has she taken them out articulated, or how's she doing that?
Yeah, they're more or less articulated on slabs. So the slabs may have broken up, they bring those back and then piece them back together. But they had found several disarticulated bones as well. So here are some of the articulated ichthyosaurs that she found. Here's an artist's reconstruction of what they would have looked like in life. So marine reptiles that parading as porpoises. So there was another wealthy person by the name of James Birch. He'd retired from a successful career in the Army and was pretty wealthy, and he spent half his pension traveling around looking for fossils. So naturally he made his way to Lyme Regis because he'd heard about the fossils coming from there. And when he got there and visited with the Anning family, they were in horrible financial straits, and this really upset him. So on March 5th, 1820, he wrote a letter to Gideon Mantell, who was a dinosaur. He was a doctor, but anyway, dinosaur enthusiast. We'll learn more about him later. So Colonel Thomas James Birch wrote a letter March 5th, and this is just part of it. The sale. So what he decided to do was to help get money for the Annings. He was going to take a collection that he had put together at his own expense over a number of years with 102 different specimens, one of which was an ichthyosaur. That alone fetched 100 pounds, but the total went for 400 pounds, or about $50,000 in today's. He sold his whole collection at auction so he could raise money. He gave 100% of it to the Anning family to help them
Place in heaven.
through the next couple of years. Yeah, so he says, I may never again possess what I'm about to part with, yet in doing it I shall have the satisfaction knowing that the money will be well applied. And he felt keenly about it because he said the sale was for the benefit of the poor woman and her son and daughter at Lyme, who have in truth found almost all the fine things which have been submitted to scientific investigation. So he felt like they had earned that and more. So that was very nice.
Once you found that complete one, how much did that sell? Just found the information.
Probably 30 pounds, somewhere in there. Yeah. But it'd be like making $15,000 one year, nothing the next 2 years, and so just the uncertainty plus. Anyway, so in 1820, she found a partial plesiosaur. Now her and Conybeare had been doing some collecting. In addition to the ichthyosaurs, they found pieces of bones that didn't fit the ichthyosaur but looked like a reptile with a long neck. And Conybeare actually coined the term plesiosaur before they ever really saw anything but a few of the scattered pieces. So in 1820 she finds, and then a complete one in 1823 that goes for 100 pounds.
They're so common
Yeah.
in these rocks that you can buy plesiosaur vertebrae in the rock shop at Lyme Regis.
Yeah. So vertebrates. So So this is a rough sketch that she made of it, along with some notes. By then, she had gotten enough books, read them, became really a very good anatomist. She knew all the technical names. She knew how they differed down to the different bones. She was one of the best comparative anatomists of the day. The comparative anatomist was Georges Cuvier, who was at the Musée d'Histoire Naturelle in Paris. He had gotten there right after the terror and kept his head through all of that. And so the museum needed to be built up, and he had lots of money from the government and was finding specimens. The first mosasaur jaw eventually ended up there when Napoleon's army got to Holland. So word of this plesiosaur got to Georges Cuvier across the channel, and he said that she was lying. Because he would contend that you show me a bone of any animal, and I will reconstruct the rest of it and tell you what that animal looked like, what the proportions were, and so on.
Just one bone.
Huh?
One bone. You can do it.
Yeah, that was his boasting.
He would fast and pray, of course.
So when she suggested that she had found an organism with 35 neck vertebrae, and the most he'd ever heard of before then was 14 or 15, he was really incredulous. And so here is the authority on all things anatomical
For the world.
for the world, and here's Mary Anning taking him on, right?
How old was she at the time?
Let's see, what year?
Young woman.
What year was this? So she would have been 24
Yep.
by then, 23, 24.
Gutsy in the day, huh?
So when others looked at it, and he finally, heard about it all, he said that he was wrong, and he apologized and made the point that he had been wrong. So here's another sketch that Mary Anning had made of the plesiosaur. That went to William Conybeare to describe. And at the Geological Society meeting, that annual meeting in London, February 24th, 1824 at Somerset House, he set the whole meeting abuzz by talking about these plesiosaurs. And how much credit do you think he gave Mary Anning? 0, right?
With her own drawing.
Yes.
Which
He used her own
was
drawing.
it kind of surprises me that Buckland, maybe Buckland said something. I'll have to go back and look at the year.
I think Buckland could have taken
Meeting.
I do. I think he could have taken it.
But he had his own fish to fry, so to speak. He couldn't wait until Conybeare had finished his talk because he had a discovery that he wanted to show. Here's plesiosaurs. This is Plesiosaurus dolichodyrus. You can see the small head there. There it is there. There it is there. But after Conybeare had given his talk, the newly minted president of the Geological Society of London, William Buckland, got up and gave the last talk, and there he talked about this specimen that came from Stonesfield Quarry in Oxfordshire, near Oxford. And this is the first published account of what we would now call a dinosaur. It wasn't named that at the time. Obviously, you can't reconstruct a group as big as the dinosaurs and understand all the complexity or even what they were based on something like that, but this is the first specimen. Here's a replica of it. And unfortunately, we don't have time to go to the Stones Gate Quarry. So by 1854, at the Great Exhibition, this is what they thought Megalosaurus looked like.
Because that's what bears and lions and rhinos and everything else look like. Big animals look like
And
that.
this is what it actually looks like. So they were close, right?
Really close.
You can tell the concept of dinosaurs changed a bit over the years. In 1826, I hope you can appreciate, if any of you have gone out to the trilobite beds and sat there for a couple hours splitting, just how much dedication to just keep going back day after year after year and splitting and just, you know, looking through things. In 1826, she found the ink sac of a belemnite, which is a squid-like thing, and the ink was still viable if mixed with water. So here's a belemnite, some sketches of the belemnites. So like their modern counterparts, they had a defensive mechanism where they could have an ink sac.
Does that fossil survive
Say what?
with the intact ink sac?
Yeah. And let's go to this next one. In 1828, 2 years later, again weathering out of the blue lias or the area nearby, she found the first flying reptile. And it is now called Dimorphodon macronix. And Joseph Anning used ink from the ink sac of the belemnite 2 years before to do the watercolor sketch of this type specimen, which is kind of cool.
Wasn't it the first flying reptile outside of Germany?
Yes, yeah.
Also in Australia, in the opal mines, they sell those belemnite cores or whatever they call them.
Uh-huh.
They're really expensive because they're opalized. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen almost. They're just gorgeous, multicolored.
Wow.
Some of them are this long. The ones this long are worth hundreds of thousands of
So
dollars.
it's still aragonite that has the mother of pearl, or what is, or it's been opalized?
It's
You said,
opalized.
okay, so it has been altered. Well, those sound pretty cool.
They also had partial skeletons of plesiosaurs where the bones were opalized.
Where was this?
In,
Cooper Pedy,
yeah.
Where?
Australia. Cooper Pedy in Australia.
Okay. So another field trip. So here's the holotype, part of the holotype specimen of that flying reptile. And a sketch of it, Pterodactylus macronix. So here's what the whole thing would have looked like. Or we flesh it out, and here it is. Right? Okay, so she's doing pretty good, right? Just persistence and patience pays off, I
Well,
guess.
if she's finding that stuff, she's gonna be finding hundreds of normal belemnites, clams, oysters. I mean, what's she doing, all that selling for a penny at the road, or?
She has a table out in front of her house, and that's set up, and the fossils are out there display. She has a window front that they're on display. Yeah, she's selling those things. Yeah, she must have found just tons of the
Well, there's
normal stuff.
Are you gonna talk about the poem?
She sells
She
seashells.
Sells Seashells by the Seashore was written about Mary Anning.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And I can't even say it, so nobody should.
Nobody can say it.
In addition to all the other things, perhaps more normal stuff would be a variety of fossil fishes. And finally, in 1828-29, she gets to go visit London for the first and only time.
That would have been quite a trip.
Yeah, after being in Lyme Regis your whole life, to go see
Yeah.
all that stuff must have been absolutely
It was
amazing.
taken.
Other people that she would come to visit her was Roderick Murchison and his wife Charlotte Murchison. And Charlotte Murchison really had more of a keen interest in geology than her famous husband. She's the one that really sort of pushed him into it, but she didn't get a lot of credit for it, and such was Victorian.
Did most of his illustrations, right?
Did most. She was an excellent artist. And all mention something disturbing about her here at the end. So here are some of the fishes.
Wow.
These are kind of weird fishes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to reel in that and reel in your, have that come up on her.
What's the age of that thing?
It's Jurassic?
Jurassic.
Yeah. So here's another one in a reconstruction, what it looked like, more of a shark. So this
Yeah.
would be a chondrichthyon. Here's what those look like. And here is the stomach of one of these with all of these belemnites in it.
Wow, that's cool.
So, I don't know, they're hoarding belemnites or something. That had to be uncomfortable after a while.
I'd be uncomfortable the next day.
I wasn't gonna go there, but okay.
And she found all 3 of these?
Yeah.
Were they going for more money or not that much?
Yeah, I don't remember, but it did lead her and William Buckland onto another sort of study that they had mutual interest in. That was trying to understand the feeding behavior of the ichthyosaurs and other things in the fishes. And if you eat, as Randy alluded to, you have to get rid of that. And so there were these things called Bazor stones that William Buckland was a real aficionado of, and he got Mary Ann to help him study. And these Bazor stones, we now call them coprolites or fossil poop.
Yeah.
So copro means feces, lithos rock. They were called Bazor stones, or a mass found trapped in the gastrointestinal system, usually the stomach, though it can be in others. So here's a sketch of specimens in circle. These were from Lyme Regis, so that allowed them to understand what things were eating. The predator-prey ecosystem.
Nice.
Finest moment, or is it finest movement?
Yep. Gonna get one
So-
of those polished and give it to you for
so-
a paperweight.
This is dinosaur poop that I think he actually collected these far up north, maybe in Scotland. So I guess if we're lucky, we'll find some of these while we're in Scotland. But what would you do with that?
Customs.
I know what you would do with that. You do the same thing that Buckland did, and that is make a tabletop that's paved with coprolites
Yeah.
and polished. So this,
What's
last
that
time we were
smell?
there in 2013, this was on display at the museum in Lyme Regis. So if we're really lucky, we'll get to see this again.
You can lick it, right?
Yeah, I mean, you'd want to eat it. You'd want to eat on that,
Put your
right?
sandwich right on top of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the stuff that he ate doesn't surprise me.
No.
Put that under it.
Dr. Ritter, I have a couple of pieces of theropod coprolite, and I used to hand them to the 7th graders and then tell them what it was, and some of them would just freak.
I do that same thing with the engineers, except it's asbestos.
Why are they eating asbestos?
Because I want to get rid of something.
All right. So let's get back on track here.
Yeah.
So in 1830,
It's good.
Wait, was she going to London to sell this stuff, or was she just?
just going to
Visit.
sort of be feted a little bit to see her specimens in the museums and to hang out with the Murchisons and just sort of see the big city.
Her and this is delicious.
So in 1830, the Annings are struggling again financially. So the good family friend and perhaps previous suitor, Henry de la Beche, puts his artistic talents back to work, and he does a watercolor of what the Jurassic coast would have been like back during Jurassic time, when these organisms that Mary Annie had found were living. So, how'd you like to go scuba diving there, right? I mean, I'm sure that they were that concentrated, right? But this is really one of the first sketches or drawings, considerations of paleoecology, of really sort of reconstructing an ecosystem and an environment. And he did it based on, and so you can see that the name of this is Ancient Dorset. That's what that means. So he did this watercolor, and then the artist, lithographer George Scharf, did a lithograph of that And these were made available to people for, I can't remember how many shillings, and then all those proceeds, Henry de la Beche took that and sent it to the Annings. And then in 1850, Robert Farron ginned it up even a little bit more fancy on a large oil canvas.
But she'd already died.
So you can see so this is 3 years after she was gone, but you can see the pterosaurs there. You can see the plesiosaur getting chomped by the ichthyosaur. You can see the fishes. You can see the cephalopods. So anyway, kind of cool. So in 1830, she's not done yet, finds yet another plesiosaur. Now, contrasted with the one that had that little tiny head from the earlier discovery, look at the big triangular head of that one. So this was this was a new species that's called Macrocephalus, or large head, right? So Plesiosaurus macrocephalus. Here is the sketch that Mary Anning sent off, and then here's a sketch that Buckland did, and then here's a skull of Plesiosaurus macrocephalus by Buckland showing all the anatomical stuff.
Don't get too interested, Mike, they'll take away your petrology card.
In 1833, in all the pictures you see of all the pictures,
That picture.
this painting of Mary Anning, you see that little black and white dog down there. She picked that up as a stray, and his name was Trey, and he was a fast friend, was always out on the beach with her. There was a landslide that nearly killed both of them. Trey got buried and died in 1833. Mary survived it.
The painting was actually painted after Trey was killed, and she had the artist put Trey in. But she would go out onto the cliffs, and they would find something, and if she needed a wheelbarrow or a bigger basket or help, Trey would sit at the fossil site and wait for her to come back with a wheelbarrow or with help to take the rocks, the stuff back to her house.
Yeah. So that,
Good dog.
Is there a claim tag?
yeah. So that came as quite a blow
Oh, yeah.
to her.
Would be
Lost her
hard.
best friend. In 1834, Louis Agassiz came to visit her and do some collecting. And what do we know Louis Agassiz for?
Gracious.
Tennis, right? Oh no, that's the other one. That's Andre.
Tidal pool drawings.
Yeah, that's right. So the father of glaciology, right? He later went on from here to. So he went on to Harvard University and had a position there, and had a museum of comparative anatomy. So he was basically a biologist, even though he was famous for the glaciology type stuff. A lot of the species of ancient fishes are named after him. His main focus in terms of fossils was fishes, so he went and collected a bunch of fishes. And he was the first one to name species after Mary Anning, to have that name as part of the genus species name. Three of the good friends of Mary Anning during her life there were the Philpott sisters. The Philpotts had quite a bit of money. The brother Philpott was a wealthy London lawyer, and not sure why, but anyway, he sent his three sisters to live in Lyme Regis, and they lived here at Morley Cottage, which is up at the top of Silver Street, and we'll probably go right by here. But this is where they lived. And Elizabeth, who was several years older than Mary, they became pretty close friends. They would go out and do a lot of fossilizing. And they had quite a few fossils in a little museum that they set up there. So here's where Mary lived, down here, with the thick of things right along Lime Creek. And up here, and this is quite a hill, up Broad Street, up at the head of Broad Street is where Morley Manor was, or is.
Where we spend the night.
We'll be in beer.
Yeah, we'll be in beer. So Mary Anning was a dissenter through most of her life and this was where the dissenters met. So weren't mainstream Anglicans. But in 1837, when the preacher left, she didn't like the new one, so she started going to St. Michael's and converted to the Anglican Church. But she was a devout Christian, went to church every Sunday, believed the articles of the Anglican Church. And so it is that when she died of a horribly painful case of breast cancer over a period of a year, at the age of 48, she's buried in the churchyard at St. Michael's. And the famous church cliffs, if you were to not be paying attention and walk through this hedge, you'd go 60 feet down to the beach through the
See an ichthyosaur.
blue lias. Yeah, right. So, so she's buried just above the cliffs where she would found a lot of the specimens. Her brother Joseph is buried here as well, and I think we mentioned before that at times you'll see people have adorned the top of the tombstone or down at the bottom with fossils and cephalopods and other things.
So wait, neither Joseph nor Mary got married?
She ever get married?
Well, neither Joseph didn't get married either?
No.
He didn't?
So I don't think he did. So this is either here or here. Anyway, if you go inside and look back out, upon her death, the Geological Society of London put up the money to do these stained glass windows called the Mary Anning windows, and it depicts 6 different acts of charity. And so here you can see the tombstone, Joseph Anning, who died July 5th, 1849, age 53. Also the children who died in infancy, also Mary Anning of the above, who died March 9th, 1847 at age 47. So her brother didn't last too much beyond her. And then down by the Philpott Museum, the famous fossilist was born here in a house on the site of Lyme Regis, and was the site of her home and fossil shop till 1826. This is watercolor that Henry de la Beche did of Mary, out doing what she does best. And the English paleontologist Edward Pigeon commended and gave her high praises. He says, in the arduous and zealous exertions of this female fossilist, in her laborious and sometimes dangerous pursuit, it is to her almost exclusively that our scientific countrymen, whose names have been already mentioned, owe the materials on which their labors and their fame are grounded. Nor, we are persuaded, will they be unwilling to admit that they are indebted for some portion of their merited reputation to the labors of Mary Anning, which is really quite true.
Which one of her friends got her the pension?
Yeah, the government gave her a pension of 25 pounds. I can't remember which one ended up doing that. Well, if you like movies, they finished shooting last year at Lyme Regis a movie that will come out presumably this year. The name of it is Ammonite. It was filmed where we're going to be. So Kate Winslet will take the role of Mary Anning, and Saoirse Ronan, Irish actress who's fairly popular these days, she will play the part of Charlotte Murchison. And so we'll get to see him fossilizing, doing all that stuff. Here's some of the activity out on the beach. So here are the actresses, and this is probably pretty close to what Mary Anning clothes looked like most of the time, right? With all the collecting in the fossil or the mud and so on. So this movie's caused a little bit of controversy, and the reason is that the director decided to portray them as lovers. That Murchison, Charlotte Murchison, comes to the seashore to convalesce, and Mary Anning helps her convalesce, and they develop a relationship. There's no evidence whatsoever,
Not a word.
that anything like that happened. And the Anning family went to the director and expressed their concern over rewriting history like that, and he said that often in movies, people who are gay have been straightened, and so it's not too much violence to flip the other way around. And anyway, if you can stomach the cultural misappropriation that's going to go on. It might be sort of an interesting period piece for that time. But there's no evidence that Roderick Murchison's wife had those tendencies either. So anyway, but that movie's coming out here soon.
She deigned to hang out with a commoner.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they did know each other. And here are some books that have come out in recent years about Mary Anning. Remarkable Creatures by Tracy Chevalier. This is a little pamphlet that you can buy at the Philpott Museum or the Lyme Regis Museum. It's not very long. I haven't read this one. This one's really good. I like this one a little bit better than that one. But so if you're interested in that kind of stuff, you know, there's some references that you can find. And anybody you're interested in, any of these geologists you're interested or places, please do some reading. We would love to hear from you on the trip about some of the things that you've learned. All right? Okay, so it looks like we're out of time. Next week, Randy will talk about dinosaur paleontologists of the Victorian era. Okay?
Good time will be had.
Thank you.
Wow.